I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Spotlight Network, we're diving into a memoir that blends coming-of-age grit with global adventure. The name of the book, Life, Luck, and Liaisons. It's written by a terrific author. His name is John Burgess, and he has penned a captivating journey from the pastoral fields of 1950s New Zealand to the high seas and beyond. With honesty, humor, and heart, the author recounts a life shaped by family tension, world travel, and the pursuit of personal freedom. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Prime 7 Media for helping us put him in the spotlight today, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. John, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Hello there, Logan, and it's very nice to see you looking so relaxed. So I hope I'm looking just as relaxed.
You are. You look very calm, very cool, very collected, and you should be because you're in charge here today. You've written this wonderful book, which is why we have you on the spotlight. What made you decide to share your story?
Well, I was born in New Zealand, and New Zealand is a very not isolated so much, but very far from the rest of the world, especially when I was growing up, which I was born in 1939, and that was at the outbreak of the Second World War. And that was when in New Zealand we became, oh, should I use the word deprived, that like the rest of the world, because of the war, we suffered a lot of shortages. So as a child, we were encouraged to be innovative, be ourselves, and mostly as a child, enjoy yourself. And despite the war and you good folk, the American forces coming down, they always seemed to bring great happiness to us as the children there, mainly because they bought bubble gum and chewing gum. And we were not introduced to that previously. So when an American soldier came along, he always produced from his pocket these lollies for us children. Now, that in turn, we got to know some of the Americans, and my mother and father, who introduced themselves to these American forces, finished up having a Dr. Luther Strayer, who was a doctor in the forces, come and stay with us. And I was always intrigued because he slept in his shorty pajamas with no top on. And that was sort of unique to me as a child in New Zealand, brought up in the old British fashion where men wore long pajamas. So that was quite intriguing. That was initial, shall we say, initiation. And as we went through and played our games and so forth, the Americans came down on the beach and they were always doing calisthenics and gymnastics to the entertainment of us. So very happy memories of my initial meeting of Americans, and absolutely in retrospect, of course, of what the Americans did for us during such a difficult time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing what a piece of bubble gum can do when you're a child. You know, it can just lift your spirits. It can make you create a friend in a moment. So it's good that those American GIs had that bubble gum with them. You were growing up in a farm in New Zealand, right?
Yes, my father had a hankering to be a farmer. He wasn't originally, and he bought a small farm, and it was a mixed farm, and we learnt particularly to ride horses. And I took up horse riding quite seriously and became an exponent of the art of doing show jumping. However, on the farm, we milked a cow. So I learned all about that side of it. And that took me through when I took a job later in life when I was 18 as an artificial inseminator of dairy cattle. And that required me to go to a scientific agricultural college to study all about the internal workings of the cow and how to get the best milk, how to get the most milk. Then that led me in turn to take up farming as a lifestyle completely, entailing making it necessary to go and train properly how to be a farmer. So although you could say I was there by chance, yes, certainly, but it became a desire. And I took up studying farming seriously. So the first job I had when I was 17 was as an apprentice as a stud shepherd on a sheep farm. And that was a wonderful experience because I learned all about the shearing, the growing of sheep, how to handle grain, etc. But the main part of it was animal welfare. And that became a lifelong, shall we say, desire to always make sure that the animals were well tended to, because if I looked after them, they looked after me.
Amazing, amazing. Now, at one point, you left the family farm and you went away to boarding school, right?
Yes,
And that was in Auckland, right?
that was an experience because the school I'd gone to in a little country town, originally, we only had 3 classrooms for the whole school. And the teacher was not very attentive. He sort of rather let children find their own way. And one of the interesting part was, instead of teaching us how to add or divide, subtract, and so forth, we had our own trees in the school, in inverted commas, plantation. So we had to learn the native names of all the trees in the plantation, and not only all the names of the true trees in English, but also in Maori and also in Latin. And probably that education was almost as good as learning the times table. But at that school, when we had Maori children. Now, Maoris, as you know, are the natives of New Zealand, and I learned a lot of Maori. But in learning Maori, as happens in life, I learnt mainly the bad words. So my vocabulary was restricted to often a lot of verbal abuse, which we all used to joke about. And the teacher tried to reprimand us, but obviously it was very difficult.
That's funny. It sounds a lot like me. I can curse in 5 languages. I can say bad words in 5 languages, but I can't speak any of them other than to curse people out.
You understand
Something
what
I
I'm
learned in
saying?
school as well. One of the things I thought was interesting, here you are, a guy who grows up on a farm, but then you become a crew member on a yacht. Where did you learn to sail? How did you get that opportunity, and what was it like?
Well, that is really a book in itself, not just a chapter from a book. And I've written a lot more about it subsequently. However, what happened was that I used to go into the city every now and again to have a break from the farm, a break from my family, and meet up with my old school friends. And when I visited one time, the fellow I met, my school buddy, he said, "You must meet this fellow." He said, "He's sailing a yacht around the world." So I met him. And he was an interesting American because he'd been a designer of the nose cone on the American Atlas missile. And in turn, he had decided he'd had enough of that life and had bought a ex-salmon fishing ketch. And this ketch had an interesting history because it had been a pirate ship, literally, making problems for American and communications on the American coast. And it had bolted down to South America when the American forces, obviously, or Navy, started to hassle it. So I joined that yacht and stayed on it for a while. Now, with no experience, the experience was not very good because the crew were Australians, a very motley lot. One turned out to be an alcoholic, one turned out to be a womanizer, and all what you read about if you read the Bible of the people that you're supposed to stay away from. So I luckily had a good, shall we say, Christian education. I've been taught very strictly on the do's and don'ts because at boarding school, that was what it was all about, was discipline, discipline, discipline. But breaking out like that and suddenly being free, there's a certain amount of confusion, you know?
Yeah.
So I then found that I did not approve, and without being holier than thou, I decided I had to find another yacht. And this is what happened. I was put the word out at the yacht club. This is where now the yacht was moored, the Royal Suva Yacht Club in Fiji. And I put the word out just around the yacht club members and so forth that I was looking for a berth anywhere because I didn't care where I went. I just wanted adventure. So the good thing was that the lady who worked in the yacht club, a beautiful Fijian lady, she told me that there was a sailor on a yacht with his wife who were looking for a crew. And she was prepared to introduce me. So I turned up at the yacht club, met Captain Buck Taylor and his wife Dottie. Now, they were well in their 60s and they didn't have any children of their own. The interesting part was this, and you'll find this fascinating as I did at the time, I'm sure, and that is that Buck had not only built his own boat, he'd felled the timber on his own property in Paul's Bow, which is near Seattle, and he had the timber taken to the mill, milled, then he seasoned it for a year, and then he set to and designed his yacht, and then he built it. So here you had this man in his well in his 60s doing these things, and boy, did he grab my attention when I found this out. So I said I'd like to join him, but I said, to be fair, you and Dottie, what's his wife's name, or Dory, if you and Dory need time to think of it without me present. And I said, I'll come back in a couple of days because I need to go to a Fijian wedding, which was going to be, as we say, a real shindig. Now, the wedding came, and during the course of the wedding, the Europeans and Fijians started to fight. I'm still not aware of what triggered it, but it was full on. And I got very badly beaten up and kicked in the face. So I had 2 black eyes. I had no skin across my nose, and I still today don't have that skin that never grew back properly. But I was well and truly beaten up just for being there. Now, they had to meet Buck within 2 days. So I went down to the yacht club. He and Dory were there. He looked up, saw my face. She looked out and burst out at it and burst out laughing and said, "You don't look half as bad as what he used to look." And he said, "We'll take you, boy."
Wow.
So they took me on board, and I stayed on the yacht while we set off from Fiji to New Zealand, because I was really, shall we say, hitchhiking home. And
Wow.
when we got to New Zealand, it took 3 weeks. It was meant to take 10 to 11 days the most. We struck cyclonic storms for 3 weeks, and that introduced me to, shall we say, life at sea. And
Yeah.
I never ever looked back. It became my way of life forever.
Amazing. Amazing. That's quite a story, particularly with getting beaten up and then having to go back to the job interview again and them seeing you like that. So, how long, once you got that introduction to yachting and the sea, how long did you work on boats? Where did you travel to? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, perhaps the story of Buck and Dory is as good as any
Yeah.
to a point. To the extent is that I stayed with Buck and Dory for nearly 2 years.
Wow.
Now, that was because we happened just to get on with this beautiful little yacht. We sailed from New Zealand. We crossed the Tasman, and we then crossed to the Australian coast and sailed up the full length of the Australian coast. And I had a bit of history on the way because my great grandfather is buried on Thursday Island. And
Mm.
Thursday Island is right at the top end of Australia. So in sailing for that period of time, of course, we had to go through the seasons. You still, even at sea, have a certain extent to summer, winter, autumn, and spring. So when the monsoonal weather came, I hitchhiked back to Australia's coast, then right down the east coast, and then across to the Queensland border. And I had been, of course, trained as a tractor driver previously on the farm. So I took up tractor driving and I drove a tractor on a very big place of nearly 5,000 acres. And that I drove the tractor day and night, because I was earning good cash and money. This is the time that I could, in turn, put a little bit of money aside so that I could keep sailing. However, prior to that, when I was on the farm, just reflect back briefly,
Sure.
I decided that in the winter I should do something useful. So I decided that I liked writing essays. I saw an advertisement in the newspaper. So I did a 12-month journalist's course with the London School of Journalism. So I became an accredited journalist as well. So I had that up my sleeve. And as I traveled, I wrote.
Mm.
And the editors that I had been in touch with wanted me to write regularly, but although they didn't get my offerings so regularly because being at sea, no post office. However, as
Right.
soon as I got to port, I had this fistful of, shall we say, articles. Now,
Mm.
that's something that I kept up. And when I sailed with Buck and Dory, I was able to have so much material and kept up the writing. And hence that eventually led me to writing my books,
Mm.
because I really had already, shall we say, written those stories. All I
Yeah.
need was to fill in the gaps, so to speak.
Yeah.
Now, when we sailed with Buck and Dory, we not only went up Australia's coast, but we then spun across to Asia
Mm.
and went to Indonesia and through that part of the world. And you can imagine in 2 years of that, how do you settle down again? Shall I say, with great difficulty.
Exactly. How do you keep them down on the farm after they've seen Indonesia, right? To paraphrase an old saying, how do you keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? Amazing. What a life of adventure. It just sounds like almost every man's dream. I think every man
Well,
dreams of going on an adventure like that for 2 years, sailing around the globe. Few people do it, though.
can
You
I
did
say,
do it, which I think is wonderful. Talk to us a little bit about your dad. Was he also an adventurous type? Was your relationship with him something that helped fuel these choices that you made to seek adventure and to seek travel?
No, my father, unfortunately, his father died when my father was 16,
Mm.
and my father became the head of the house. And he, in turn, had to follow the track of his father. Now, his father was a buyer of fabrics for a large company in England, although based in New Zealand, but buying fabrics. And it was something that he enjoyed at the time as a young fellow, but as he got older, he got this yearning to be a farmer. And he then bought the small farm, bought a bigger farm, bought a bigger farm, then
Mm.
bought a really big farm, and it was over 5,000 acres.
Oh.
And I, at that stage, was in my early 20s. I'd done my
Mm.
sailing stint, and I was working for Dad. And he had a very, very short temper. And
Mm.
there's something when you work with livestock, you must not lose your temper
Mm.
because the animals you are there to look after, not
Yeah.
to abuse. And he didn't physically knock them around, but he used to get upset. And
Mm.
one day he said to me, I can't understand that horse. I simply said, you never will. He said, why? And I said, because you're not a horse. So that sort of made him think a little bit. Yes, the animals are different and you have to
Exactly.
treat them differently. You can't treat them as humans, although you'll see many newsreels and so forth that show people that are doing that, but not in real sense of the word.
Exactly. If you want to get along with dogs, you got to think like a dog. Even if they have human characteristics, they're still a dog. And it's
That's it.
important to remember that. Let's talk about your move to London. What motivated that move, and what did you find when you got there?
Well, that's very timely, your question, because it gets where I fall out with Dad. And
Mm.
I've been working 7 days a week for months,
Mm.
long days. And I was, shall we say, not because I was a young man, single, not so much worn out, but frustrated
Hmm.
because Dad and I, you can imagine getting up in the morning and seeing your father and saying, oh, excuse me, but I want out of here. So I
Exactly.
took the initiative and decided to get away from my father's farm and get away from the farm once and for all. Now, big decision, young bloke, but I had all my life ahead of me. So I flew to London. And when I got to London, I had been led to believe that there would be when I was in New Zealand, an English fellow had led to me to believe that there was a job for me in London. I got to London, nobody had heard of me, no job. So I packed my little swag. I used to carry a little duffel bag, and I headed up to the North Circular Freeway, which you may or may not know, but it's the main outlet out of London going north. And I went and stood beside the traffic light. A huge Guinness Brewery truck pulled up, massive truck. I just stood on the step, opened the door, said, thanks, mate, and jumped in. The bloke said, what are you doing? I said, well, you stopped. He said, it's a red traffic light, you fool. I said, well, hold on, the traffic lights turned green. He said, oh, so it hasn't. Cars were building up behind him. So he took off and we became mates.
Mm.
We talked. He was so interested in what I was doing. He helped me. He told
Wow.
me there were places that I could get free sleep, where I could get free food. and he knew all the tricks of the trade. And
Wow.
so I went right up to John O'Groats at the north of England, went far north as I could. And then I came back down through Wales,
Mm.
hitchhiking, sleeping
Wow.
out, and in turn when I got back to London, this fellow had made a contact with a friend of his, and the fellow I'm referring to is the bloke who said he had somebody that I could work for.
Mm.
So the fellow in London then said, "Well, we better get you a job." And so they said, "We're going to send you up to the north, and you're going to go to Liverpool, and in Liverpool you will sell meat for us, and you'll sell meat that we can't find a home for. We're
Mm.
having difficulty." And so I went to Liverpool.
Wow.
And in Liverpool, it was wonderful because the Liverpudlians, I don't know if you know that north of England, but they're just wonderful people,
Mm.
entertaining. They've suffered during the wars, as you know, but they are a wonderful race of people. And they, in turn, gave me the chance of selling a lot of New Zealand lamb shoulders and New Zealand sheep frozen legs, mutton. And I happened to be able to sell it because I did a simple thing. I went and found out who were the contractors that supplied the feeds for all the boarding schools, the prisons,
Mm.
and so forth. And what I had was exactly what they wanted. This was just using initiative, using a bit of nous, as we used to say. And
Mm.
the people in London were absolutely overwhelmed. They couldn't
Mm.
believe that here was this farmer from New Zealand selling all this product for them in England.
Mm.
And in turn, they then said, "We want you in London." And I said, "Well, I'll think about it." They said, "No, we're telling you." And I said, "Look, you told me to come up here. Now you tell me to go. Well, I'm telling you, I'll take my time. I'll tell you when I'm ready." So, I mean, I was a man in my mid-20s by then. So I was self-confident, shall we say.
Mm.
I hope not cocky. I hope not rude, but I wasn't going to be pushed around by Poms.
Yeah.
So the next day I decided to go to London. And in London, I settled in and I never looked back. The meat industry became my life.
Amazing. Amazing. We only have a couple minutes left, but let me ask you this. As you look back at your book, as you look back at your life, what was the part that was the most enjoyable to write, to recount, to think again, and to relive? What was that? Was it the sailing? Was it the hitchhiking? Was it climbing into that Guinness truck? I mean, you made a lot of bold choices in your life, and they impacted the trajectory of your life. If you've never gotten into that Guinness truck, you wouldn't have discovered all that you discovered about England. If you never met up with that couple, Buck and Dory, you never would have possibly sailed the globe like you did. So, what was your favorite part to write of this book?
Oh, absolutely sailing with Buck and Dory. If you read the book, you will find that to travel with two people under those circumstances during that time was just exceptional. And I I became, I believe, for Buck and Dory, their surrogate son, a son they never had. Now, remember, Buck had been a submarine commander. He was on the first operational submarine out of Pearl Harbor. He was a tough nut, but he liked me and he couldn't help me a lot. So that's the best part of my life, apart from being married, of course.
Exactly, exactly. And all the pleasure and joy that that brings, of course. I'm talking about the young man's adventure, and you had plenty of them, more than most. And it's because of the choices you made and the wonderful life you are living. And what a story. It is called Life, Luck, and Liaisons. It's written by John Burgess. He's an amazing author. He's an amazing man. And he has penned an honest and adventurous account of his reflections on life, legacy, and the choices that shape us. John, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
It's been a pleasure, and I hope that we do cross paths again.
Well, I look forward to that. Talking to you makes me want to get on a yacht, and it makes me want to stick my thumb out and catch a truck to somewhere unknown, somewhere
May
wonderful.
may add a little bit of spice.
Yep.
There's a lot of women in the world too.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And no doubt that is one of the best parts of it, without a doubt. Absolutely. John, I appreciate your time today. Love speaking with you. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time until next time on Spotlight.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.